All right, welcome to the party, pals. So today's going to be a little bit different than our previous episodes, but you got myself, Chris Whitlock, and then also Dwight Turner over here. And we're just going to talk a little bit about a couple different privacy articles that we find interesting and about the space itself. If you guys have any questions, whether it's related to this topic or something else in the privacy realm or even GRC, go ahead and drop those in chat and we'll go ahead and mark those as well. There's also our Discord server that I'll drop too. And one of the first things we wanted to go ahead and start out with, let me get this pulled up here, is we wanted to go ahead and pose this question to everybody. So we wanted to go ahead and start mixing in a little bit of the different quiz questions just to get people thinking about it, sharing some different knowledge, and just helping with that learning curve as well. Did you want to head and go over this question? And then we'll go over the answer at the very end.
Yeah, sure. We've talked about a lot of stuff. We haven't talked about GDPR. Probably need a whole episode on that. But this question in particular is GDPR data protection impact assessment requirements. Under the GDPR, which scenario is a DPIA not required? So you might want to drop what you think the answer is in here. We can go through, I don't know, Chris, you want me to go through each one of them? It's like,
no, I think that's all right. So I did also post this image in the live chat on our Discord server as well. So you guys can take a look at that in the Discord. But yeah, so under the GDPR, in which scenario is the data protection impact assessment not required? So go ahead and think about that while we go through a couple of these different articles, and then we'll come back around to the answer at the end. Let me go ahead and get this first one pulled up here.
It's been a busy last week of the year for these regulators. A lot of enforcement action happening coming out of the EU. So this first article up is about Netflix getting pinged. Cool, 5 million.
Yeah. So these Dwight also shared these in the Discord, and they're also in the description of this video. For the two articles we're going to be covering. So $5 million for not being transparent about data usage.
Something you gotta be on top of. You gotta explain people what you're doing with their data. You can't do any sort of vague stuff. And this is interesting and kind of a good thing for people to take a look at, because it wasn't that they didn't have a privacy policy or anything like that, but they were too vague about what exactly they were doing, which is a no-no.
Yeah, and I think that the bigger companies are the ones that end up getting the spotlight in the news, but this also happens to small and medium businesses too from time to time, right?
Of course. Yeah, of course. And you also have to think, like, these cases take forever to be processed. So we're hearing about the fine now, but it's been in courts, easily the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, so this one in particular, the Netflix $5 million, it looks like the investigation was originally launched in 2019. So we're looking at almost like 6 years practically.
Yep.
That's pretty crazy.
Yep. Yeah, it takes a while, but eventually they get to you, and yeah, sometimes it turns out this way. But yeah, Netflix, I think in both of the cases they're probably going to try to appeal them both, but these bigger fines are really what send ripple waves and end up getting people to take this stuff a little bit more seriously. So it is important, and I think that's a good reason for us to bring it up today.
Yeah, and so the root cause of this is that they did not clearly enough state in their privacy statement about how they use the data that it collects. So what they do with the data that it collects from its users. And so they didn't state it clearly enough, is the gist of this article here for Netflix. And since then, they have made updates to their privacy policy and privacy statements as well. So we'll see how this also moves forth. I think so. These big giants do hit the headline news way more than the small and medium business fines do. But also, this is what kind of moves the industry as well. And I think we'll see that on this next one too. Did you want to move over to this next one now?
Yeah, let's jump into it.
So this one's pretty big, especially with all the hype around AI. So Italy fines OpenAI over ChatGPT privacy rule breach.
I think we've been getting
So
closer
I
and
believe
closer
it's
and closer
15
to
million.
this topic because we've seen a lot of issues coming up in the news about AI, about automatic decision making. So it was only a matter of time before we see this. We know these models are using data to train, and so finally we see Chat GPT, like the like a Christmas gift for Chat GPT is this fine from GDPR, and these are some of the biggest privacy fines that you can get are coming out of GDPR. Was it 20 million or 4%? I think is the max. 4% of your revenue, global revenue, is the max GDPR fine. So it is significant.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so violating privacy rules and failing to protect children from ChatGPT portion. And I think OpenAI, but also a lot of these other big AI companies, there's been a lot more talk about the privacy aspect of it because you also have it from the front of like skimming the data off the internet as well, social media, and so many different other things. And we have other services that we briefly mentioned in a previous article about how like Google Photos or Apple Photos also like scans your photos as well, like in your gallery, cloud, and so forth. So there's a lot of different ways I could see, this type of fines expanding in the future too.
Yeah, the wild part is when you get to the end of this article, they do talk about how um, OpenAI complained that it was disproportionate, like the fine didn't really meet the crime, is basically what they're trying to say. But the, they responded that the fine could have been higher. The fine was only 15 million because they were cooperative in the whole process. So
Yeah. And I think in this space as well, you'll get a lot of people stating that, these fines should be higher, or you also get the people who state that it should be lower, of course. And it does look like OpenAI does plan on filing an appeal. I don't know if they have yet, but they did state that it's disproportionate. So, and like PBO had mentioned a moment ago in chat, let me go ahead and mark that message. PBO had mentioned 5 million is pocket change for Netflix on that first article we talked about. And I think the same thing could be said for the 15 million. I think it's 15 million euro. But yeah, still, what was their profits? So, but you also mentioned there is like that 4% thing with the GDPR in particular. So there's a couple different things involved with that.
yeah, it's kind of relative. I mean, sure, overall it might not be a whole lot of money, but you're also not seeing fines that large a lot of places. With the exception of Facebook getting caught up on stuff. It's still in the privacy world. It's a pretty big fine.
Yeah. And then if you guys have any other questions or otherwise related to privacy, especially, definitely drop those in chat. There's also the Discord server. Dwight's pretty active over there in the privacy chat. But these are a couple different articles that kind of stood out and are, pretty fresh. So I think we're just going to see more and more of this. And I think it's going to be really interesting. I think this is also what's going to further ignite the privacy demand in the GRC realm. So more companies are going to be looking at this and saying, oh, these big boys are getting hit. We should really preemptively take care of this. We can't take that kind of a hit.
And I think on the EU side, they
Right.
I think on the EU side they kind of know that, and there's been a lot of movement. It's the US side that's a little bit slow, and we're just starting to get around to taking some of this stuff seriously, especially for small and medium sized companies. So I think we're going to see a little bit of a push. It's interesting that your quiz question talked about impact assessments, because that is really the main tool that we have to sort of catch some of this stuff, to see whether or not what we're doing does it involves any sort of sensitive data, Does it does it infringe on anybody's rights? Is our consent, really freely given and informed? So all those are things that we're going to have to, sit down and evaluate, and sort of things that we sort out behind the scenes, and then you create this assessment with the idea that hopefully no one's ever going to ask for it. But if somebody does, if we're hopefully you're doing it right, and you can show that you did your due diligence on these privacy issues.
Yeah. And then, was there anything else that you wanted to add here? I think we can go ahead and move over to the answer to the quiz question here in a moment. If you guys want to go ahead and double check that in Discord and drop your answers, and then we can cover that.
I'll also add that on the GDPR side, and we're just getting a privacy impact assessment. I think PBO is saying that hardly anybody does them here anyway. So we're just getting to the privacy impact assessment in general in the US, but on the GDPR side, you see a lot of different types of assessments based on the GDPR itself. So they have privacy threshold assessment for transferring to different countries. You have a legitimate interest assessment, like do you really have a legitimate interest in processing this particular data? Like, it gets a lot more complicated than what we kind of see here. So it's really it really kind of makes you take it a lot more serious when you see what is happening on that side. It's a different level.
Oh yeah. And like I had responded to PBO's thing there, stating that most few people / companies do privacy impact assessments. Yeah, I think that's definitely true, but I think that's going to change just because of how big these fines are, and then also how much more common it's coming. And really, you have like that CCPA from California, a couple other state privacy laws that are growing as well, and that GDPR that really like ignited everything. So I think it's going to be still years to come, but I think we're making progress at least. So
it might come faster than we think. We got these 5 new privacy laws kicking off in the new year, and expecting the new year to bring more, because I think there's a lot of ambiguity. I don't think people really expect a national privacy law, especially with the incoming administration. So,
bam. And then let's go ahead and go over this quiz here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this back up for everybody. And so the question was under the GDPR, in which scenario is the data protection impact assessment, DPIA, not required? With 4 different options here. So processing that involves systematic monitoring of a publicly accessible area, processing that involves automated decision-making with legal effects, C, processing of special categories of data on a large scale, or D, processing necessary for compliance with a legal obligation. And the correct answer is going to be D. Did you want to go ahead and go over this a little bit? And also, I'll drop a link in chat for people to learn a little bit more about this as well for privacy impact assessments.
Yeah, I think there's a couple templates out there for impact assessments. I think they're a good starter one. You're going to want to create your own sort of template for your company, your specific issues. And I think some of those answers are coming straight from the GDPR, and what type of processing requires special, this specific sort of DPIA, so, or this specific sort of privacy assessment. So you're even going to want on your assessment to have those almost like check boxes, like is this a large amount of public data, like all those choices that we saw there. But this one in particular, D, let's see, they're generally required when processing operations are likely to result in high risk to individuals, except when processing is necessary for compliance or legal obligation. I think that's the only real exception on there. Everything else is kind of almost verbatim from the GDPR itself in terms of requiring you to fill out an assessment.
Yeah, and I think not only with the global scale of the internet nowadays, with all these different platforms, but like I've seen a lot of companies just run with the GDPR requirements to ensure that they're in compliance. So even like a California company, they'll just run with the GDPR because it kind of trumps over it to an extent. Like it doesn't trump over it from a legal standpoint. They still have to be compliant with the CCPA, for an example. Um, but it meets those requirements, is my understanding as well. So a lot of these companies are referencing to the GDPR, is my understanding, which is also where this relates to.
Yeah, and these big companies, you're gonna want something that kind of triggers this, like, hey, we have a new project. You know, I mean, you're either gonna have to have it automated, and it's saying like, hey, you're doing something new with this sensitive data. You need to go ahead and do. You have something coming up saying this is a new risk, and because of that, you're gonna have to fill out a privacy assessment, or you're gonna want to be in such good communication with your development teams and um, system administrators and database folks and data scientists and all of that, they're that you're kind of leaning on each other. They're letting you know when new things are coming up, um, or vice versa. Because in some of these cases, when you're dealing with some specific categories of sensitive data, you have to fill out the DPIA and submit it before you're actually allowed to process that data in some of these sort of like higher risk categories.
Yeah, and check out that resource I dropped for the IAPP website that talks a little bit about it, and that's where you'll find a couple different templates too. And also, if you ever have any questions or otherwise, drop those in our Discord server. So we have the privacy chat there. Dwight has the CIPP US and the CIPM. So definitely the local ambassador for privacy. Uh, and then we did have a really good question in chat as well. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off, and we'll pull up this question here. If you guys have anything else, definitely drop that in chat, or after the stream, you can always put that in the comments or in the Discord server. So don't we give up any chance of privacy when we just click through agreements to get the free apps? What's your take on that, Dwight?
Yes and no. I mean, it depends. It depends on the app itself, but a lot of times, if they're pretty permissive, they're taking your data and selling it, and yeah, you don't really have a lot of reasonable expectation to privacy. Um, but of course, not all apps are created equal. A lot of them are not um, on the same way. They're like not dealing with data brokers, but maybe just using your data to create some new sort of thing or advertise other products. So yes, we give up our privacy, but to what extent, I think is more of the question. And then do you have recourse? Are you able to go back and say to that company, depending on where they are, where they're based, what they comply with? Hey, I want to revoke consent to use my data. I want you to delete my data. I don't want to be involved in any sort of sale or anything like that. I think is something we still have the right to do in a lot of cases, even if we have clicked on everything and not read anything and decide later that, hey, I want to get serious about my data.
Yeah, and also, yeah, I think that's a really good way to respond to that type of question. I also want to throw it out there related to this too, that we're always looking for feedback and suggestions, not only for our upcoming episodes for the privacy stream, but then also we could do other things as well. So definitely drop any questions or suggestions. What do you want to see? Do you have any privacy questions or topics that you want us to review or take a look at, provide feedback on, and so forth? Discord's the best method, or during the live streams especially, you could drop comments or questions as well. So there's a lot of different topics in this domain, and we're really just trying to pick out some of the different highlights and get the conversations going.
Getting called out about your background already. Yeah, this is interesting stuff. GDPR is a mess. We do need to do a whole episode on it. We could have a whole episode dedicated to just what types of ways are you allowed to legally process data? I think that could be interesting. We could do an episode on these different types of assessment, maybe even just looking at a legitimate interest assessment or something along those lines. I don't know how to tackle that elephant, but if if y'all are interested more in GDPR, we can talk about that. I think we have some privacy basic stuff we want to cover, as well as probably getting to some of these new U.S. state laws in the new year that we're looking at. But yeah, plenty to discuss.
Yeah, and then also Moxie also mentioned, so along the lines with privacy and free apps, what advice would you give to the average person? Why should they care about privacy? I think just myself alone could talk for a few hours about why you should care about privacy, and we could make an entire movie out of this. However, I think that we should probably do an episode coming up regarding that topic, like why should we care about privacy? There's some really good resources that we could drop into the Discord server in the privacy chat channel related to that. But in short, like the big thing that I see is that the industry is ever growing. And like one of the biggest things that most people say is, oh, my information's already out there. But what it really comes down to, especially in this day and age, is not only the following generations, but then also minimization. So that's a large portion of this. Like even with all the data breaches and like myself, I've been alive the whole time for the internet itself practically, and yeah, a bunch of data breaches and so forth, but still data minimization.
Yeah, and I
But
think
there's also that privacy, like for your own security as well. Where that data minimization comes in, like a service like Delete Me, for an example. I utilize that service because it minimizes that footprint.
yeah, I think this is the great time of year to get a little bit more serious about privacy, even if you might be a little bit skeptical, even if you think your data's everywhere, everybody's got it. you know, I think now is a good time to just, just do a checkup. As we're renewing everything and going into this new year, like, um, it's a good time because we know that these threat actors are getting crazier. They're targeting us. They're targeting our loved ones. If you got older folks in your family, they're calling up grandmas using your voice and your likeness to, get some money out of them and everything. So I think because the threats are getting crazier, that's one of the, I think, big things in my mind about why we should take it a little bit more serious. But again, it can be overwhelming. So just, start with what you can. Maybe look at your phone, see what apps you can delete off, or which ones you can restrict in terms of what they tracked. If they have access to your photos, do they have access to your location, and anything related to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. And yeah, if you guys have any other questions, definitely drop those in Discord or otherwise. Drop those in the comments for this video. We do these every single week, so every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Central, and then we have our main Study GRC meeting on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Central. And we'll catch you offline. See you in the Discord.